I don't know why I'm up here. No, we have a show on RetroWareTV called The Game Chasers, and awesome, thank you.
They've heard of us?
Yeah, I thought, okay. My earliest gaming memory, oddly enough, coincidentally enough, actually, is Empire Strikes Back here. And if we didn't, I didn't know what he was bringing in because, like he said, we have no game plan. And then, you know, once Nintendo hit, I went completely bonkers, like most of y'all in here, I'm sure, and it was game over. I play a lot of video games. That's my resume.
Well, I guess you know who I am because I'm associated with this guy over here, but let's see. No, yeah, totally get it.
Of course, your Facebook page.
Hey, don't bring that up. Let's see, I started in television. My first memory was in television boxing. And to that, you know, Nintendo, just like, you know, most of us actually, you know, when I first played Super Mario Brothers, it blew my mind. And then when I got Super Nintendo, I say Super Nintendo is probably my favorite console of all time, Super Mario World. And Link to the Past, the best Zelda game ever made. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And I blame you.
My favorite game is Mario 3, and RPGs suck.
Hello everyone, how you doing? Good? Alright, cool. No response. Right.
At the NES
I'm a game collector. I also help produce a gaming show called The Video Game Years, which deals with video game history for RetroWareTV. And probably my first gaming memory was playing the Coleco Telstar Ranger, which none of you have heard of, besides Sid, probably. And it was one of those standalones, you know, kind of like this here, Pong. You have like 6 different Pong games. You have squash, you have handball, but it's all Pong. And it had a really big, would get you killed by a cop, light gun, like Magnum, like 44 Magnum gun, and you had a couple of light gun games. And that was my earliest memory. My cousin also had an Atari 2600. And so Pitfall was probably another early memory, Sid. And my cousin would always get on me claiming that I broke his 2600 joysticks. I'm like, no, they just break on their own. It wasn't me that did that. So yeah, that's where I'm coming from. So let's go into our next topic awkwardly.
Don't play with the joystick so rough next time.
That's not a cartridge slot. All right. Now, do we have a next topic? I have a next topic if no one else does. Since I'm the only Canadian up here, there's a couple of Canadian things I wanted to talk about. First of all, does anybody in the audience recognize this game?
Yeah, Evolution. Yep, Sydney's Evolution.
They can read. Okay, panelists, does anybody know anything about this game? What's the significance of this video game? Does anybody know what is, in gaming history, what is significant about this game?
What's it called?
It's called Evolution, and it was published by a company called Sydney, which happens to be my name, and it's also spelled correctly, although I am not getting any royalties from this, unfortunately. Okay, let me ask you another question then. In terms of Canadian executives in the gaming industry, who has recently changed companies and probably the richest Canadian gaming executive out there? Anybody know? He's not Canadian. Last time I checked. See, he worked at a company called Distinctive Software, which he founded when he was 17, which was then bought by Electronic Arts, and then he moved to Microsoft. There we go. Don Matrick. Now, Don Matrick is worth about $70,000 billion dollars. Lives in Vancouver, is now the CEO of Zynga, for those that have played any mobile games. And Evolution was actually his very first game, and it's actually a pretty good game. He developed this when he was a teenager. He also developed a series of games called Test Drive. Anyone remember Test Drive? Test Drive kind of survived into the console era from the computer era. And that was, Evolution is actually sort of considered to be the first successful Canadian video game, and it just happens to be that the guy that designed and programmed it, he did work on it with someone else, but went on to be, continues to be a very successful executive in video games, which is kind of interesting because a lot of times you wonder where people come from. So that's your Canadian gaming history lesson for today. And also, could you hold up the BCs? Anyone ever hear of BC's Quest for Tires, the video game? You may have heard of the comic. Okay, that was also developed in Canada, close to Ottawa, back in the day, and published in the same year, which was 1983.
Did Sierra put out a version? Yeah, Sierra.
Yes, Sierra published it. Sydney, again, same company that basically did it up here in Canada, did Evolution, so same thing. Now, there's one other Canadian thing that we can't miss talking about right now that's related to gaming history. Anyone remember this game? So, yeah, it's a minty fresh copy, still in the original shrink wrap. Pulled it right out of the desert. I don't think there's any video game out there that has more lore associated with it than E.T. It's been considered to be the game that sort of caused the video game crash in the 80s. It's, single-handedly, people say. Stories get sort of exaggerated, I think. But the one big story is that Atari did, and you've all heard it, I'm sure, supposedly buried a whole bunch of these cartridges in the New Mexico desert or landfill. And so, for some reason, somehow, and I was expecting Geraldo Rivera to do like a special, where he was going to go digging for everything, but a group in Canada, somehow, I don't know how we managed, probably because we're very nice, right? We're nice, right? We just asked. You guys didn't think to ask nicely to go into this landfill and dig these things up?
They got permission to search for those.
They got permission.
That's not how we do things.
So, right. Sometimes it works. Yeah. So for all you guys that have gone in the middle of the night trying to go through this landfill. So it's in progress right now, but there's been like a 6-month period where they have to go in and actually dig up in the landfill and see if they can find those cartridges. So I don't know about you, but I'm looking forward to it. Is there anybody have a feeling on that? You guys, are they going to find anything?
Well, I got. What's the point?
Well, it's something that everybody talks about. I think it's one of those things that I think we'd finally want an answer for.
There we go.
Well, people are fascinated because they look at it as this was like the death of console video games, and it's simply not true. If anything, E.T. is almost just a reflection of what was going on in the industry at the time. The fact that Atari had absolutely no quality control over their games at all, it required no licensing from anyone to develop their own games, so crap was just thrown out there from every direction. You had a game called Chase the Chuckwagon that was, Purina dog food making their own video game. When you get to that point, when you have pet food games coming out, you're in trouble. The industry's in trouble, and so Howard Scott Warshaw, who we actually interviewed for the Video Game Eaters, he said, "Yeah, I'd like to be known as the guy that killed a billion-dollar industry, but no, it's not true, and it's not true." But for some reason, E.T. sort of the lights put on that game as the first huge licensed game that was a huge, massive failure because it was just rushed out and poorly developed. But it's not the worst game ever. Whoever says it's the worst game ever is just saying it just to say that. And so, I don't know. Can we switch topics or talk about something else? I don't know I want to talk about maybe ask everyone on here, what was your favorite, time of video game history and why? What do you grasp onto as wow, I love that era of gaming because all these cool games came out, or we had genres that developed their systems. You want to
Start us off.
I'll start us off. Okay. I'm really fascinated by the sort of the NES 8-bit era, just because the industry was dead, it was gone, and Nintendo. It's almost not a miracle, but Nintendo wasn't given a shot at all. They didn't want to put the system in game stores. Nintendo hired for America. Nintendo of America was 12 guys, including Howard Phillips. They go out to Jersey, northern Jersey. They stay in these awful hotel rooms outside of Newark Airport in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and they just truck it up to northern Jersey and New York City, FBO Schwartz's and not even game stores, toys, and set up the system themselves, set them up in malls, and people, hey, come over here, play this new system, and that's how they got the word out of Nintendo. So it really was a long shot that it gained a foothold, and people gave it a shot after they were so just disappointed in other game systems. So that's why that early, like 85 to 86 point, when people weren't really interested in home consoles even yet, Nintendo really didn't even get popular until about somewhere in 87, where people started actually, you knew someone that had the system or was going to get it for Christmas of 87 is usually when people got it. So that's one of the most fascinating time to me, just because it was just like almost, video games became new again around that time to a lot of people.
I guess my favorite moment would be, I guess right around this when the Super Nintendo came out. Because up until that time I was playing NES, and to me that was the quintessential, the video game unit of all time, the best. I mean, how could you ever get any better than that, right? And then like Super Nintendo came along, and I was just fascinated with it. You know, how this is going to be 16-bit? I mean, that's twice the bits, right? So it's got to be twice as good. Exactly. What is a bit? Rue? Rue will tell you what a bit is, and bit rock maybe. But yeah, I guess that would probably be my favorite moment. Just the anticipation of the Super Nintendo and just getting it for the first time.
Well, since they covered probably two of the greatest eras in video gaming, I'll go ahead and go with the next one, PS2 days. And GameCube, a lot of people give GameCube flack, but there were some good games on it. Resident Evil 4, amazing. First time I played it was on GameCube. And Monkey Ball. But no, PlayStation 2 is the best-selling console, home console of all time. So that says something right there for it, doesn't it? The library was enormous. You had your GTA 3. The graphics were so much better than Nintendo had done to that point. You know, obviously NES, Super Nintendo. So just, I guess, graphically speaking, go PlayStation 2.
2 years ago.
That's true too.
Just about. They're still making PlayStation. That's like 11 years of making a console. I don't think that's ever going to happen again. Or console with Game Boy, didn't it? No, but that was different iterations of Game Boy. They changed up the iteration. They went the Game Boy Color, and they went the Game Boy Advance.
Wow, that was a real nerd fight, you guys. Good job.
It's hard for me to pick a particular generation, but I can tell you that when in the early 80s, I actually played most of my computer games on the Commodore 64 and the Apple II, which was, I spent a lot of time doing that. Although today I'm not really a PC gamer, I guess you could say I was a PC gamer back then. In the mid to late 90s, I kind of got into collecting on the Atari 2600 and stuff like that, but I still really wasn't playing. But it wasn't until the Xbox, and it's going to sound strange, but the Xbox came out, and I ended up playing Crash Bandicoot on the Xbox, of all places, even though it was traditionally a PlayStation character. And then I went back to the PS1 games, played all those, and then I was hooked, and then of course the PS2, I had to get that, and then I just honestly fell in love with the PS2, just like you. It's like so many great games. It's such a great library, and so many of the favorite games that I've played from beginning to end for me have been on PlayStation 2.
My favorite moment in video game history is the Game Boy. I'll tell you why. The Game Boy took video games from something that, just kids and teenagers play, to everybody was playing the Game Boy. Soldiers in the first Gulf War had Game Boys. And if you go to the Nintendo World Store, there is a soldier had a Game Boy and they got a mortar attack and the Game Boy was like fried and it still works. And it's plugged in and you can play it. Well, you can't play it, but you can look at the Tetris demo at the Nintendo World Store. President George Bush had a Game Boy. I mean, everybody had it. It's like businessmen had it. It just, I think it really blew up gaming, and it really put Nintendo on the next level as well, because can you name another handheld console that can compete with Nintendo's?
They tried.
The Lynx. The Atari Lynx, thank you.
Engage.
No, and the big crossover. Tetris was played by
Yeah, Tetris?
Gizmodo.
I mean, yeah. Although PS Vita, we can root for it. Come on, PS Vita.
PSP Go.
So bits have to do with the size of the characters in the register and the CPU. And if you have more bits in that character, you can have more information and theoretically make more powerful. Anyway, I could go on. I'm going to kind of copy Billy and say the 16-bit era is my favorite, obviously.
I wouldn't have imagined that.
Yeah, I know. But I'll talk a little bit differently to why. It's basically the pinnacle of 2D gaming. When the PlayStation, the first one, and the Nintendo 64 and all that came out, 2D gaming was basically considered dead. Oh, everything cool is now 3D. You know, look at Super Mario World, and that showed you could do 3D games really well, as opposed to like Bubsy 3D or something like that. Well, Bubsy, the first one's good. Yeah. But anyway. And so for at least 5, 6, maybe even 10 years, 2D gaming was essentially dead. It was passé. It was old and buried. And interestingly, since then, especially with these rise of indie developers, you see a lot more 2D gaming out. And it's kind of like a retro chic thing because, 1, they're easy to develop for, 2, they're easy to pick up and play, and 3, you can have very, very deep, engrossing gameplay experiences with a two-dimensional game that are just more difficult in 3D. Plus you have things like the Uncanny Valley, things like Heavy Rain, you know, while great in production, are still a little creepy to watch. You two can fight.
Heavy Rain was overrated. Didn't really do a whole lot.
Okay. You guys want your own panel together?
But since I have the talkie stick, I'm going to go ahead and change the subject to what I would like. Because Earthbound, no. Yes. No, just kidding. Though you should buy it on the Wii U Virtual Console right now. It is kind of rare to have a really literal piece of gaming history in front of us. The first video game is something, I like that. It's kind of debated. Some people consider a game developed by the British during World War II on one of their first computers ever, Noughts and Crosses. In America we call it tic-tac-toe. I don't know what you guys call it. One of those. Some people say Tennis for Two in the 50s.
Tic-tac-toe.
Awesome. Tennis for Two, which was actually made on an oscilloscope at the Brookhaven National Laboratory in New York. That was in the 50s. And then, of course, there's Space War, which was made at MIT in the early 60s. That can all be debated depending on what your definition of a video game really is. The first video game console is not up for debate. It's the Magnavox Odyssey. This came out in 1972 by Ralph Baer, who is still alive, last I checked. Which is amazing. You have the person who by himself developed the first video game console, still alive in his 90s, up in New Hampshire. Okay, I guess it would be down in New Hampshire here, but and this was pretty impressive. I'm sure Syd or Pat would definitely like to talk more on it, but I mean, this is a piece of technology that had more than one game on it. It had the first kind of iteration of Pong, and et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, Pat, you look like you want to jump up and say something.
Yeah, I mean, they're very loosely different games, more or less controlled where they, you know.
Let me tell you a little bit about this system.
I mean, yeah. So basically, it can the functions control differently what you can do with the paddles, what you can do with the dots. What's amazing, though, the story I want to say to this is that it's on YouTube, and it's an amazing clip. There was like a game show from like 1972, and it was like a bunch of like celebrities on the panel. It was like guess what this is or guess what I am. And so there was a Magnavox guy in this three-piece suit. He came on to advertise this. The system had not come out yet. And so without seeing it, they had to guess what the guy was doing. He was playing this game on the TV. And you had the host of the show playing with them, and they were describing what was going on. And imagine you had never heard of a video game before in your life. You didn't know even what the concept of one was. And so they were like, what are you doing? You're interacting with the TV? They had no clue. And when they revealed it, the look on these people's faces was just like, they were surprised by it. They knew it was cool, but you could still see they couldn't fully comprehend what was going on. That they were interacting with the TV with controllers, just like, they're like, it's called a what? It's game interaction. Oh, interesting. And they called it like electronic tennis, and just like, oh, that's really strange. So it's literally a moment in time when video games was like thrust on the world on national television. So go on YouTube, search for it. It's like Odyssey TV game show 1972. That's my story about the Odyssey. So if it wasn't for that little guy, which plugged along and did well, it sold a decent amount. There's like 2 or 3 different iterations of that. Sid probably knows more about than me. They did like different like versions of that. They also had like a big like hunting rifle, light gun accessory you can buy for that, which again could get you killed. I guess that's really the motif of back then. They can get you killed, video game guns.
And Ralph Baer, he was an electrical engineer who did this as a hobby. He's an inventor. He has a lot of patents in his name. And he basically, he went to several companies showing this off before Magnavox finally picked it up, right?
Yes.
Thank you. And anything more on the Odyssey? Yes.
Ralph Baer received a medal from the president himself for his work.
That's true. It's like the Medal of Freedom or something like that.
It's also one of those cases where what we think of today as such an amazing thing, we can't probably imagine a world without video games. A lot of struggles. There was a lot of marketing mistakes made. People, because it was made by Magnavox, who was a major manufacturer of televisions at the time, people mistakenly thought that they had to have a Magnavox television to use it. That would be like, having a PS3 today and I can only hook it up to a Sony TV. Not. But there was a lot of confusion because there was a lot of things. But just further to the point with Ralph Baer, I mean, this guy was doing light gun games, and although, like, actually in the late 60s is when he first got that working in the lab. I mean, in the 60s, this guy was like, he was like doing Duck Hunt in his own way. I mean, that's just amazing. Right, I mean, he was doing all this stuff, and it just like, he was just so early and such an amazing guy. But yes, you're right. It does go back quite a ways.
There's amazing electromechanical games. If you want to go before video games, that go back to the 40s, that you can't imagine what they did. They had like projectors.
They had like games back in the 40s, even projectors, moving objects, and you would shoot with the Lycom. And it's not a video game, but it's like the prototype of what a video game became.
Yeah, it would be like these light-emitting diodes that would when
The panel never needed more microphones.
yeah. It was basically these light-emitting diodes that when light hits them, it creates an electrical charge and an impulse, and then that sets off some gears or servos, and you have a spinning duck, like whee, and a whistle. Yeah, no. But seriously, 30s. I think the 30s was the earliest example of such things. Yeah, and that's kind of amazing because you don't think about things like that. I mean, you see pinball games from the 50s, and that kind of blows my mind. But
Was that the 30s too?
yeah.
Valley News.
Go video games.
All right.